Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the panel on the role of faith and civic institutions in restoring male community. My name is Mike Mayer. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Theta Chi Fraternity, a men's collegiate fraternity represented on over 150 college and university campuses across North America. Theta Chi has welcomed over 210,000 young men into its membership ranks since the fraternity's founding in 1856. Theta Chi's mission is to develop college-age men into successful students, good citizens, lifelong brothers, and resolute leaders through the extension of a helping hand. I'm also the immediate past president of the Fraternity Executives Association, which is the professional association of men's and women's college and fraternity executives. My passion for furthering the development of young men was sparked because I've been the beneficiary of such male-focused mentorship and support throughout my life. Starting with the examples set by my father, both at home and as a youth coach, to my involvement in the Boy Scouts, as a student at DeSmet Jesuit and all-boy Catholic high school in St. Louis, as a collegiate member of Theta Chi Fraternity, and as a member of the Knights of Columbus. Now, as the CEO of the International Men's Fraternity, my days are spent working to develop the next generation of young men to better serve God, country, and fellow man. My wife and I have two young daughters and an almost 2-year-old boy, and while the topics we are covering today are of obvious relevance to the future development of my son, they are also important for my girls as well. As their dad, I believe it is critical that my girls, and all girls, grow up in a world where they see and interact with outstanding brothers, fathers, boyfriends, husbands, and other models of positive male behavior in society. So I submit that whether you are working directly with the young men or not, the topics we are covering at this symposium most certainly impacts your life and your profession. This panel will examine how religious groups, volunteer organizations, fraternities, and other civic associations provide young men with mentorship, moral frameworks, and opportunities for meaningful service. The discussion will explore how these institutions can adapt to engage a generation skeptical of traditional involvement while maintaining the core elements of ritual, service, and community that effectively foster male development and belonging. I would now like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, directly to my left, we have U.S. Senator James Lankford, who represents Oklahoma in the United States Senate since 2015, serving as Vice Chair of the Senate Republican Conference and Chair of the Senate Ethics Committee. Before his Senate career, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives and was ordained a Southern Baptist minister. Senator Lankford is known for his conservative stance on fiscal policy, social issues, and government accountabilities. Next to Senator Lankford is Patrick Kelly, who is the 14th Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, leading the world's largest Catholic fraternal organization with over 2.1 million members worldwide. He has a distinguished career in law, theology, military service, and public policy, including 24 years in the U.S. Navy as a Judge Advocate General. Before becoming Supreme Knight, Kelly served as Deputy Supreme Knight and Vice President for Public Policy, strengthening the Knights' advocacy and membership growth. He also played a key role in establishing the St. John Paul II National Shrine as a major pilgrimage site. Kelly holds degrees in law and theology and serves on several Catholic boards and committees. Next to Patrick is Larry Stanton Wiese, who serves as executive director of his fraternity and general counsel of Kappa Alpha Order, a position he has held since 1996. Initiated in 1987 at Midwestern State University, where he served as chapter president, he later worked as an educational leadership consultant before earning his law degree in 1995. Larry is a past president of the Fraternity Executives Association and was a founder of both the Fraternity and Sorority Political Action Committee and the Fraternity and Sorority Action Fund to advance advocacy for Greek letter organizations. He is licensed to practice law in Virginia and the District of Columbia. And last but not least, we have Michael DeVaul, who is Director of Young Man Thriving at the YMCA of the USA, an organization he has served for more than 44 years as an innovator and impact leader. As National Executive Director of Young Men Thriving, He leads initiatives across 28 states and 67 cities to strengthen YMCA as a premier youth development organization focused on measurable outcomes for boys and young men, particularly first-generation, low-income, and at-risk youth. His work is grounded in targeted universalism, setting universal goals while deploying targeted strategies to unlock potential for all. A podcast host, storyteller, and belonging strategist, Michael elevates young men's voices to spark meaningful change. A father of two, husband, and proud son of Evanston, Illinois, where he began at the historic Emerson Street YMCA, he brings personal authenticity and 4 decades of award-winning leadership to his mission of ensuring every young man has the support and community to thrive. I'll also mention as well, he is a brother of Omega Psi Phi.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, to start off, I'd like to give everyone a sense as to the perspective each of our panelists comes to this discussion on. And so I'd like to ask each of the panelists to please share a formative experience from your own life where a faith-based or civic institution provided you with mentorship, community, and a sense of purpose. And also please mention as well what made that experience particularly meaningful. I'd like to start with Senator Lankford.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let me just say thanks again for the invitation, the topic, and for all of you that are engaged in this issue. This is one of the single most significant issues that we have in our culture right now, is where are young men going and what's going to happen in their engagement. For me, my parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and I jokingly say, not only do I not remember my parents being married, I can't imagine them being married. They're two very different people, but for me, I grew up with my mom, and my mom was determined I was going to be around male role models. So we got involved in church. She pursued ways to be able to get me connected with scouting, getting involved in children's ministry at our church, what we called Royal Ambassadors, if you know back in the day, on that, to be involved in that. I got involved in a Christian Taekwondo group, which clearly was successful for me. But she was actively pursuing ways to be able to put me around role model men to find ways to be able to connect, but they circled often around our church. And to say, if you find connection points around our church, you felt like it would be healthy relationships and people that would help steer. So for me, later on in life, I graduated and became a youth pastor. And I was a youth pastor for 22 years before God interrupted our life and called me to come to Congress. But for 22 years, that's what I did, was invest in next generation and try to figure out what can we do to be able to help call young men, especially, into service and into leadership, and to figure out how we can take the next step from I'm drifting to I'm actually engaged and find my own purpose.
Thank you, Senator. Patrick?
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, just to say, so I joined the Knights of Columbus while I was in college. I was at Marquette University, and I joined in 1983, a long time ago. And I did that because the other guys on campus who were members of the Knights of Columbus, I just liked those guys. They were guys that were not afraid of their faith. They were not afraid of being Catholic. They were not afraid to go to Mass on Sunday afternoons at Marquette. So I did that really out of friendship. After I graduated, I went to law school and I was in the Navy. And it was there, though, that my belief in the importance of faith and family and brotherhood really came to the fore. Because, as Mike said, I was a Navy Judge Advocate General. So I was the lawyer. I was the lawyer aboard ship. I was dealing with all sorts of problems coming from the sailors, right? And I used to jokingly refer to myself as the traffic cop at the dysfunction junction. And so, but what I found was that so many of the men who I was dealing with, I wasn't dealing with sort of the best of the best. You're dealing with people who were struggling, who were in the military, wonderful, courageous young men, and it was men that I was dealing with in the military, but they often had family backgrounds that were just absolutely shattered. And so I could see how they didn't, the basic decision making and thinking through problems, they didn't have that. And that's when I really started to get interested in these larger questions, and then eventually the Navy, I came to Washington DC, and I got much more active in the Knights of Columbus then, and then from there I became very involved in it. But I really
Pretty active now.
Yeah, yes, I'm pretty active now.
Indeed, yes, yes. So, yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
story, Mike.
No, thank you, Patrick. Larry?
Thank you, Mike, and I want to thank the scholars and the elected officials who've been here today, and the people like me who are on the front line of this crisis with young men. I want to thank Ellen with the Lafayette Group, because she is a rock star, and the way they pulled this together, she's done a great job. I also want to thank the senator, because the senator doesn't know this, but we have an intersection ourselves. A young man who works with me for Kappa Alpha Order actually attended Heritage Baptist in the church the senator ran before he came to Congress, and he said, be sure, he said he won't know me, but be sure to roll that into your comments. And the point is, the point is that he has taken what he learned that the senator helped teach him, and he's paying that forward and helping young men in KA and through fraternity. And so that's a great legacy, and that's part of what all this is about. My own experience is I'm the oldest of 4 sons from a single parent household. I had a grandfather. My mother's father was very involved in our lives, but not as much for my younger brothers. And I ended up becoming a male role model for my younger brothers, and found my own peer role models and other role models through my fraternity experience with KA. And that's one of the reasons I didn't start out. I went to law school. I thought I was going to be doing something very different. And as I got into it, I decided that being involved and supporting this experience for young men was incredibly fulfilling. And so I helped direct a staff that helps mentor young men across the country and support volunteers, but I also get to mentor young men who come to work for us. So those of us in this field, you have young men who come to work, like the young man that went to Heritage Baptist, the senator would know, who come to work and get mentoring in a staff role and maybe in their first job out of school. So it has been incredibly fulfilling, and I'm glad that we're talking about this crisis today, because we need to do more about it.
Thank you, Larry. Michael, would you like to share your perspective?
Yeah, I'm Michael DeVaul. I am basically in an organization, and my origin story is actually where I started. So I had 2 parents born in Evanston, Illinois, and I did what a lot of young boys do is, I would get assertive, and I would say things to people that I shouldn't say. And even outside of my home, right, there would be people who would remind me I was better than that, and I had a lot of potential. And in this setting, right, it was police officers, because I used to talk back to police officers. School teachers, I used to talk back to school teachers, but they would always rally and say I was better than what I was exhibiting. And that, to me, particularly in my middle and high school years, was so important to me. And I want to stop there for a second, because I think we forget how important in middle and high school identity development actually is. And that brain, that frontal lobe, is starting to develop. And when you don't have a safe and support system, that is what shows up as an adult when you don't have it. And so it was in my formative years, it was the YMCA, my school, and my community, because back then, no cell phones, but if you missed school, the neighbor would know and would tell your mother or your father, you would get in trouble when you came home. Ooh. So it's that supportive system. When I got to college, it was actually my fraternity. In the same way, it would show up if I wasn't in class, wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. It was my fraternity that would show up. I have 2 boys, 29 and 32. So my hope is, as my young son, or my oldest son will call me occasionally and say to me, hey, I can't get to my therapist, but I'm calling my secondary therapist. And I never thought of myself as a therapist. Thought of myself as a father. But it is important when we don't have support systems in our lives, that we have people who, I always say I didn't rescue anybody. I think, I might have thrown them a life preserver, but it is so important to have these systems. And so all I'm really doing, honestly, is giving back to what I gave. And someone said this earlier, I heard some scripture being mentioned. I always say it's in Genesis 4:9. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes. You are.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to direct my next question to Senator Lankford. And Senator, you referenced your experience as both a minister and a legislator. But if you could share, drawing on that experience, what unique roles do you feel faith communities play in male development that other institutions simply can't replicate?
Quite a bit. So government is not God. And so if you're going to actually develop your faith perspective and where you're going to go in foundational issues, you got to have a foundation to stand on. And part of the challenge that we have in culture right now is that young men don't have a foundation to stand on. They're making it up as they go. And if you've ever been around a middle school boy, making it up as you go is a really bad idea. Because they're guessing their way through, or they're going on social media trying to be able to figure out what other people show that they are doing, and without a core foundation that's there, you crash. And then you think, will this work for other people on social media that I saw? It's kind of like saying, I saw it in Hollywood, so it must work. But it's not true, and it's not real. So given the option for somebody to be able to actually have something to stand on that is real, the depth of faith to be able to be there for my own faith in Jesus Christ and what I've seen in my own life by being able to stand on that foundation. That's a foundation that's strong for 2,000 years. That's a pretty tough foundation. And if you want to go back to the Genesis story, from the very beginning in the foundation of the earth, God has loved and cared and guided and redeemed what was broken. So we have a lot of broken guys that need some redemption. And they need an opportunity to be able to know, can this get better, and is there an option? And the answer is yes, and faith really brings that to you. If you don't believe that there is an option to be redeemed, you make a wrong turn and you just keep going down that way because you don't see an option out. That's why this works both in prison ministry or in youth ministry, which some days look the same, but depending on your youth master. There's an opportunity for redemption at any point on that. And that's very, very significant. One quick fun story. Last week I was on a plane, which is every week, but the plane is just about to land, and I'm sitting on the aisle, in coach, by the way, and the guy that's across the aisle from me leans over right as we're landing, and he says, hey, I just want to introduce myself to you. My son was in your youth ministry decades ago. He was at your camp, and he doesn't really know you as senator. He knows you as the person that helped him come to know Christ and to set a foundation, and he still talks about you often, not as senator, but as the person who helped him in his faith. That's what faith does, that it helps you form a foundation and a path that can actually carry you, that actually works, that's not just guessing and making it up.
No, thank you, Senator. I'd like to direct this next question to Patrick Kelly. Patrick, the Knights of Columbus, as was referenced, have maintained a strong membership of more than 2 million men across generations. In fact, I understand from our side conversations that membership is surging right now. Can you share what elements of ritual, service, and brotherhood remain essential to engaging men across these generations? And what are some things that your organization has had to do recently to adapt to changes in times?
Yeah, so we're an old organization, 143 years old, and we have had to continually adapt to the signs of the times, right? So that's very, very important. When we were founded in 1882, there were 600 fraternal organizations in the United States. It was very popular then for men to be in fraternal organizations, and then there, as I said, there were hundreds of them. Now there's just really a handful, and I think adapting is the key. So obviously there's the things that we have changed, like online membership and having a digital platform and all of this, which is important because you have to provide young men with an experience that they expect. But I think the more important thing is what we haven't changed. So like we haven't changed our affiliation with our faith, the fact that we are proudly a Catholic organization and that we're in support to our parishes. We haven't changed the fact that we're a service organization, that we believe, based on our faith in Jesus Christ, that we are in service to others, right? So that we serve and sacrifice for others, and that's something that unites all of the men in the Knights of Columbus. And then friendship, right? Friendship is the thing. I mean, Christ did his ministry really through friendships, right? It was more than that, but he assembled 12 friends, right? Imperfect people. And that's so friendship is the key. One of the things we've had to do of late is we have to understand that young men are in a very different situation than they were years ago. And here's just a little story on that. 25 years ago, my mother was having knee surgery, and so she was laid up for maybe a week at home, and she asked my dad, she said, honey, could you take the clothes out of the washer and put them in the dryer? And my dad said, sure. Which one is which?
Oh, wow.
Okay, but that was my dad. My dad was a World War II guy, right? I mean, that's just, but that's different now, right? So men now are part of the, play a much larger role in the home, and women are often working. So we've had to adapt to sort of, we have to be careful to not put so much on our guys in terms of meetings and things like that. So we've had to adapt in that way. But the things we haven't changed is the fact that the principal organizing principle of the person is the longing for love and belonging, and the longing to be part of something bigger than yourself. And so I would say, Mike, to answer your question, it's the things that we haven't changed that have led to that success.
No, most certainly. And no, I appreciate the reference to friendship as well, because I think the notion of true friendship is undervalued today. And particularly those of us in the fraternal space have recognized the importance of that over many years. Next question, Michael DeVaul. You've worked with young men across 67 cities for more than 4 decades. What are you hearing from young men today about what they're looking for in terms of community and belonging, and how has that changed over your career?
So the tools are different. What we use and how we measure, the tools are different, right? I think the strategy is the same. Let me just say this too. We're in this work primarily focused on 11 to 17-year-olds. And the reason we're in that space is because when we did the environmental scan, we had less nonprofits working in that space. So we decided to go into a space where other people weren't. And my hope is those of you who are out here, we can be a bridge, because some of it is about the handoff, right? We're born, right? And then we go into kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten, but then the question is, right, who are we handing off in middle school? And part of what we say is we've got to build a bridge. Let me just say, we lose our boys between 5th and 6th grade and between 8th and 9th in the transitions. And I'm going to focus on one thing, because I'm going to tell you, here's what we're trying to focus on. Here's the innovation, adaptation, is chronic absenteeism. Now, there's no more truancy. We're not saying punitive, but what we're telling you is if you look cyclically in your own local communities, our boys are not going to school. Now, chronic absenteeism should not be used as a punitive focus and strategy. When we say creating connected communities, what we think it should be used as an indicator light that the beginning of loneliness and isolation is beginning. Because school is the gateway to career, right? If you're not in school, you're not going to get to a career. And we say boys are smart enough. We're in that underground academy. We want them in the taxable academy. So the question for us in the adaptation is retraining our teams, our youth development leaders. We would love to do that more collaboratively, because I think that is one of the places where we're struggling, is how do we receive boys when they're vulnerable, and we create brave and safe spaces. And I always say to people, when they swear at you and they've never sworn at you, what do? You don't kick them out, you ask them what happened this morning. What happened? Because you've never said that to me. And so something must have happened that triggered a response. And what we want them to be is more in response mode than reaction mode. Does that help?
Yeah. No, it's great, Michael. No, thank you for that. I'd now like to transition to Larry Wiese. And, we've made mention, Larry, throughout this panel thus far about some of the timeless values and principles of our organizations. And fraternities are lifelong single-sex organizations. They're rooted in tradition, history, and ritual. What is the power of that continuity across generations? And how does learning from both older men and peers shape young men's development in a way that other institutions cannot?
I appreciate that, Mike, and I think we know from our research, we know from the polling that Signal did that being a member of a fraternity is a significant contributor to well-being and further success in life. And so I think from that standpoint, we know that what we have is working, and I think from young men today are truly looking to fill the gap. You've got so many homes without fathers, like my own home was. You've got so much online, what I would call hollowness, the hollowness of the online experience that they chase. And so young men are looking for, and I think one of the other polling results was that over 50% of men are in a fraternity or want to be in a fraternity because they want the experience. They need that mentorship. They need that peer-to-peer connection. They need those meaningful friendships. And so the reason that our organizations continue to be relevant, and I was interested to know that we're a little bit older than the Knights of Columbus. So, the reason that we continue to be relevant is because we're providing those connections day to day. And so, again, while a lot of the tools and a lot of the options we have for connecting are different today, all of the rituals and the meetings are being done the same way they were being done when we started about 160 years ago. So I think that all of that has a meaning for young men, and they're looking for that connectivity. And so I think that speaks to what we need to be doing. And I would also say it's important to recognize that we've gone through some fits in our society, and I understand this, but I think we need to recognize the importance of single-sex organizations and having those spaces, because I can tell you, and I'm the father of a daughter, and I can tell you that young men behave differently when young women are in the room, whether they're 11 or whether they're 28. And so, hey, you've got to have space where young men feel comfortable asking questions and asking for help, and we need to protect and preserve those spaces for young men and even older men to be able to have those conversations and develop those friendships.
Thank you, Larry. Well, this next question I'd like to pose and open it up to the entire panel here. We talked a lot about our traditions of our institutions and some of the formalities that come with our organizations. But we know that today some young men are often described as being skeptical of those traditional institutions and formal commitments. So what are barriers to involvement that you're seeing, and how can organizations adapt without losing the essential elements that make them effective? Might like to kick us off here? Yeah, Patrick.
Mike, so one thing, just to sort of turn it around a little bit, what we have found is a lot of young men who are coming out of perhaps their parents had a kind of a relativistic view of life, and they were connected to the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. It's those men who are really sort of yearning for more of an institution and yearning for more of a moorings, right? And so I think this is what we're seeing in the Knights of Columbus, particularly of late. So we'll bring in 100,000 men into the Knights of Columbus this year. Last year, I think it was 96,000. The year before that, it was 93,000. So we see kind of a trajectory like that. Years ago, and my colleague Tim Sakosha, Tim was probably here for this, I went to Georgetown University. There was the Knights of Columbus Council there was going to have an induction ceremony, and they were doing it in the basement of one of the halls, and they wanted to make it really spooky with, it had the arches and darkness, and I thought that was, they really liked this, but the younger guys liked the ritual to it. They liked the tradition of it. So I think it's important to remember that sometimes these things swing one way, but then they will swing back, and it's key, I think.
Let me lean in on, so we're in 64 cities, 29 states. We got about 6,000 boys, and here's an interesting data point, right? Only 67% of those boys have 2 or more supportive adults in their lives. So the call to action really is to get more adults working with young men. The other is, there are some real bright spots on places where boys are saying, I loved it when you took me to camp and you told me it was no cell phones. And while I really didn't want that to happen, the amount of resilience and spiritual awakening I got from not having to have a phone. So I think sometimes there are barriers, but I think also utilizing share of voice of the young person, because part of what they're telling us is they want more adults in their lives. The second thing they're telling us is technically, I don't have to have the phone all the time. And we just have to be able to make decisions to say, okay, well, yes, when you come to this, put your phone in this box or put your phone in this basket, but you're not going to have that phone for the next hour. And I think that's okay, right? These are the kinds of things where I think as adults, I would say if I can lean into anything, we have to become better adults who are supporting students. And we can make decisions, same way I would make it for my own sons. These are things we're not going to do because we're going to do these things. And I think the barrier can be what we think is voice. When we really engage voice, they're really asking for more help. So let's give it to them.
And
Any other comments? Yeah.
I would add to that. I think one of the things, and we're having this, the conversations, the side conversations have been almost as rich as the panel discussions that we've had. There was a conversation earlier today about how risk averse young boys are, and Wynn Smiley can tell you the data points on this, but how there are fewer broken arms today among young boys than there have been in the history of anybody keeping track of that, because young men, and then one of the women talked about her 5-year-old son reading the legal liability disclaimer on a swing set. And so we've got young people, young men in particular, who are incredibly risk averse. And so I think the other thing that we need to do, in addition to being, we need to remove obstacles, and we need to make sure that our own leaders, both grown-up and peer-to-peer leaders, are going out and getting those young men. Those young men want the friendships and the organizations that we have to offer, and we need to make sure that they are not sitting there waiting for a call or an invitation that never comes. We need to make sure that we're out in the residence halls, on campuses, asking them to come for a cup of coffee, asking them to have a chance to explain what we do so that we can take the risk out of it. Because if we wait on young men to come to us, we may miss out on some real opportunities there, and they will miss out on a real opportunity.
Yeah,
Hey, Mike, let me follow up quickly on that, because I think this is really important. We were serving less 11 to 17-year-olds in our own internal data, which is why we are also serving 11 to 17-year-olds. But it's interesting that it was the intentional recruitment is how we got better. But back to your point, right? We got to go out and get them. We can't hope that they come. Girls come faster, right? Without all of the heavy recruitment. Boys, you have to heavily recruit. So our getting them out of the game room and getting them into a place where it's brave and safe space. You can still play games and play games with others. I think the intentional recruitment is really important, and I think we should collaborate on that intentional recruitment.
Yeah,
Senator?
let me throw one thing in. When Patrick was talking about this before, about Knights of Columbus being a service organization, I think one of the key things that I really see with young men is they're not being asked to do anything. They are risk averse. They're used to gaming, and if you mess up there, you just reset. You just keep going. And a lot of young men pretend to be leaders in the virtual world, but then actually can't lead in a real world. So asking a young man to be able to take leadership in something that's serving, that has purpose, makes a big difference and actually engages, whether that is inviting them to say, hey, I want you to go on campus and have this conversation. That's a huge risk for a lot of guys. Like, no, I've never been asked to do that before. For them to be able to step up. But we found that over and over again. A lot of organizations want to recruit guys to be able to come in and say, come play. We're going to play basketball, or we're going to play football, or we're going to play this game. Men connect when they serve and do something, rather than just play a game and walk away. Play a game, walk away, I'm not developing a friendship. I serve next to somebody with something that's purposeful. I'm connected to this person because we have purpose together. And I think that's one of the missing areas that we really miss is we're challenging men to come play but not come serve and give their life away and sacrifice for something bigger than themselves. When you do that, you find more men that will engage and go, this is bigger than me.
Now, that's an excellent point, and I'm interested to hear from both Patrick and Larry, too, in terms of, recruitment methods with your organizations. How have you seen those be most effective in terms of reaching young men?
Larry, do you want to go?
Sure,
You wanna go
I'll
first?
go first. I think a lot of people have, if you weren't in a fraternity or a sorority, a lot of people have misconceptions about how you actually join, how you join these organizations. And part of that has led to skepticism, particularly among fraternities. So people think that, it's one big party and everybody comes, and there is risk associated with that. But what usually happens, and I was telling this story earlier today, what usually happens is if you're on campus and you're tired of eating residence hall food, or you might go over and have a hamburger at the KA house or the Theta Chi house or the ATO house. But in the process of doing that, you'll meet somebody who maybe is a sophomore, maybe a senior, maybe somebody from your major, and that's how you recruit. It's one-on-one recruiting, because that's how it works. That actually has been how it's always worked. And again, there's lots of data tools you can use, and there's ways to identify people and send emails. But really, the effective recruiting is still one-to-one, meeting somebody, introducing them to the organization, asking them, trying to develop some commonalities and a friendship, the basis of a friendship. And when you have that, they'll come back for more than just the free hamburger. So.
Yeah, and I would just say quickly on that. So 4 years ago, we started an initiative called CORE, and I mentioned it this morning, but CORE, C-O-R, Latin for heart, and it's basically small group discussions that the Knights of Columbus sponsor at Catholic parishes, and men come and it's twice a month, and they talk about things. Now we give the format, or they can choose another format. But we've done videos. We did a 12-series video on Into the Breach. What does it mean to be an authentically Christian man? We did one on the mission of the family. What's the mission of the family? And we're going to release one on the dignity of work here in the coming weeks. Mm-hmm. What that does is it gets these men together, and it gets them talking about their lives, and it's sort of a safe place, to use that term, but it is truly a safe place where they can learn something, but then also start talking about how their lives interacts with what they're learning, and that is forming the friendship, right? And then they're getting something, they're improving themselves. Their wives see a difference in this man, so she's good with him being gone on a Tuesday night, and so that, I think for us, again, it's friendship, it's service.
I'm told we have about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Right up there.
Emma Johnson, I'm with Senator Lankford. I'm Emma Johnson. I'm with the Virginia Coalition for Boys and Men. And I was wondering, in your years with youth groups, what have you learned today that works today to bring young men into faith communities?
I think it is challenging them to be able to come be a part of something bigger than themselves. One of the things I'd mentioned earlier, they do want a place where they can actually connect and where they can actually have structure.
And what does that look like?
So the structure thing is interesting to me, because I think a lot of people say, well, this generation doesn't want structure. I think you heard it from several of us. That's not true. Often when I interact with young men, especially if they grew up in a home where it was very permissive and they could do whatever they wanted somebody to be able to help set boundaries around them. So they might be calling them out, as was said by Michael, saying, stop, this is not you, you're better than this. Or to be able to say, hey, has anyone ever told you what that really does to somebody when you say that? But calling them out and holding people to account and getting them the opportunity to think about it really does make a difference for them. Setting a standard, for me, it was teaching a biblical standard. To say these are biblical principles that don't just work for this generation, work for every generation, because we were wired in such a way, created by God with purpose and meaning, and these things are destructive and these things are helpful. And to be able to talk through those things gives them an opportunity to be able to think, and for a lot of young men, they just have never even considered that, because the people they see around them, what they see online, what they see in movies, and in gaming, especially in gaming, no rules, do whatever you want, go wherever you want, say or engage whatever you want on it, and it's allowed, it's no big deal. But in real life, it's not like a game on that, and they're looking for what actually works in this. So for me, it's the setting the boundaries and calling out right and wrong that often young men would go, yeah, that makes sense, that's a better way.
I want to add to that, because I think to the structure point that the senator mentioned, one of the things that we found in fraternities, and again, one of the things that gives me hope in this whole conversation is young men will figure it out. And what we need to do is we need to make sure, A, we're not in their way, and we need to make sure that we give them some tools to help them. But what I've seen in my 30-year career is young men will figure it out if you give them away. And one of the things that we've seen a lot of and that we've actually leaned into, and I'm going to give credit to my friend Win Smiley at Alpha Tau Omega, because we had spring up Bible studies in chapter houses. Now, there's a ton of people out there who might not, who find that unusual that in a fraternity house, there are tons of young men who are seeking a Bible study. And Win Smiley, when ATO developed a guide to do a Bible study, kind of also tying in not just the Christian principles on which our organizations were founded, but also tying in the ATO ritual. And it has been widely popular. And we took that in KA and helped develop our own Bible study guide. And so when you've got young men, that's the point about the cry out for structure, and they want something, and their interest and ability to also figure it out if we stay out of their way and help them.
I would say sparking curiosity in a safe space and letting them talk about it together, because there's an action and there's a consequence. And we always say, when you do bad things, someone else is usually responsible for the consequences, right? But if you do good things, right, you remain in charge. And so the importance is also remaining in charge of self.
Yeah.
Yep, right over here.
Michael New, professor, Catholic University of America. A lot of survey data over a lot of time periods have shown consistently that women are more church-going than men. But there's been a lot of data coming out recently showing that among young adults today, men are actually more church-going than women. And we see a bit of a flip there.
Shifted.
Does anybody know, does anybody have any thoughts about why that might be and what opportunities that might hold?
I don't know the why, but I have definitely seen the same thing in my own church and in youth ministries, where it was like we couldn't find a guy for the longest period of time, and now that has shifted dramatically. So I don't know if that's I couldn't even begin to guess on the data on why, but I've definitely seen it as well.
Yeah, and we see it in the Knights. It's seen in the Catholic Church as well. And I just think men in many ways have kind of had enough, and the areas they're searching for leaves them empty. So they're searching. Well, you know what? Maybe I'm going to turn to God. I'm going to try. Right? I'm going to try. Yeah. And I think that's largely what it is.
I think one of the concerns that we have, and that it hopefully is, we're seeing a reverse in this trend, but one of the things we've been watching in fraternities for a few years is that fraternity men and young men in general are tracking more conservative, more traditional, i.e. wanting to go to church, while young women are not tracking necessarily that way. And that, of course, I mean, if you watch these statistics, if you're involved with college students like we are, you watch these statistics, you've got young women who say they're not going to date somebody who doesn't vote their way, and young men say the same thing. And I'm like, well, if there are more young women who are trending more progressive and more men who are trending conservative, you've got a lot of people who are going to end up single at the end of this process. So you hope that it all gets knitted back together. But for my part, I am glad to see young men going back to church, and hopefully the women will come back and we'll be better off.
For a dad of a godly 20-year-old single daughter, I'm ready for a godly conservative boy to show up.
Amen.
We're looking for it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a tremendous panel, and I'd like to wrap up, since it is a panel on faith and civic institutions, with a very brief Bible passage that I thought was appropriate for today. And this is from the first book of Timothy. Let no one have contempt for your youth, but set an example for those who believe in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Please join me in thanking our panel.